The human brain did not evolve and then discover cooking. Cooking evolved the human brain. That distinction changes everything about what we think we are. For most of human prehistory, our ancestors were not the smartest things on the savannah. They were medium-sized, slow, and outcompeted. Their brains were big enough to survive, not big enough to dominate. Something had to change. And what changed was not a mutation, not a predator, not a climate shift. It was a fire, and a piece of meat held over it. Here's the thing no one tells you about the human body. It is expensive. Brutally, almost absurdly expensive to run. The brain alone, that 3-pound organ sitting behind your eyes, consumes roughly 20% of all the calories your body burns every single day just to exist. Not to think hard, not to solve problems, just to stay on. For an animal living in the wild, scraping calories out of roots and raw meat and tough, fibrous plants, that is an almost impossible tax to pay. Evolution does not reward expensive organs unless they pay for themselves. And for hundreds of thousands of years, a bigger brain was not paying for itself, because the calories were not there to feed it. So for a long time, the brain did not grow. It stayed roughly the same size across entire species, across millions of years. Homo habilis, walking across East Africa around 2 million years ago, had a brain roughly half the size of yours, not because the potential was not there, because the energy was not there. The gut was eating it all first. The gut is the other half of this story. A raw diet, and for almost all of animal history, every diet was raw, requires an enormous digestive system to process. Raw meat is tough, dense, and full of proteins that are locked inside cellular structures the body has to physically demolish before it can absorb them. Raw tubers and roots are packed with starches that are largely indigestible without significant gut processing. Raw food gives up its calories slowly, reluctantly, and incompletely. To extract enough energy from a raw diet to survive, an animal needs a long, muscular, metabolically hungry digestive tract, and that digestive tract burns energy, enormous amounts of it. The gut of a great ape, a chimpanzee, a gorilla, can account for more than half of the animal's resting metabolic budget, half of all calories burned just running the digestive engine. This is the trap. Big gut burns energy. Brain needs energy. You cannot have both. Not on a raw diet. Something has to give. For millions of years, across dozens of hominin species, what gave was the brain. The gut won, every time. And then, somewhere between 1 million and 800,000 years ago, in the archaeological record of sites like Wonderwerk Cave in South Africa, there is evidence of fire. Controlled fire. Not lightning strike fire that burned and went out. Fire that was managed, maintained, returned to. Ash layers, burned bone fragments, heat-altered plant material, all of it sitting inside a cave, used by early humans who were not yet anatomically modern, who were not yet Homo sapiens, who were, by any biological measure, still becoming whatever we would turn out to be. They were cooking, and cooking was quietly dismantling the trap. Here is what heat does to food that no one thinks about. It is a form of predigestion. When you apply fire to a piece of meat, the proteins begin to denature. They unfold. They break apart. They become dramatically easier for the body to absorb. The cellular walls of plants burst open in heat, releasing starches that would otherwise pass through the gut, largely unused. A cooked tuber delivers roughly twice the net calories of the same tuber eaten raw. Cooked meat is softer, faster to chew, faster to process, and gives up its energy at a fraction of the metabolic cost. Fire is doing the work the gut used to do. Fire is, in a very real sense, an external stomach. And when the gut no longer has to do that work, the gut can shrink. This is the pivot point. This is the moment the trap broke open. As cooking became regular, not occasional, not accidental, but a reliable daily practice, the selection pressure on maintaining a giant, expensive, energy-hungry gut began to ease. Individuals with slightly shorter digestive tracts did not starve. They thrived. They were lighter, faster, and crucially, they had calories left over. Calories that were not being swallowed by the gut. Calories that were, for the first time, available. And evolution, which runs entirely on availability, took note. The human gut today is dramatically smaller than you would predict for a primate of our body size. Compared to a chimpanzee, our intestines are roughly 60% shorter. That is not a quirk. That is not an accident of diet. That is a structural signature of hundreds of thousands of years of cooking baked directly into the architecture of our bodies. We are, in our internal organs, shaped by fire. But the gut shrinking is only half the story. because those freed up calories had to go somewhere, and they went up. The fossil record tells the story in bone. Homo erectus, who appears around 1.8 million years ago, and who many researchers now associate with the earliest widespread and possibly controlled use of fire, has a noticeably larger cranial capacity than earlier hominins, not a little larger, significantly larger. And as you move forward through the record, through archaic Homo sapiens, through the gradual refinement of skull shape, through the flattening of the face, the shrinking of the jaw, the rounding of the brain case, you are watching an organ expand in real time, fueled by a caloric surplus that had never existed before. The brain was not growing because of some random genetic leap. It was growing because, for the first time, the body could afford to let it grow. The jaw is part of this too. Raw food requires powerful jaws, massive chewing muscles, thick, reinforced skulls with prominent ridges at the top, called sagittal crests, that anchor those muscles. Cooking made food soft. Soft food does not need a powerful jaw. As the jaw shrank, the chewing muscles shrank. And as those muscles shrank, the skull was free to reshape itself. The bony ridges retracted. The forehead rose. The brain case rounded outward in every direction because nothing was pulling it back anymore. The modern human skull, that high, domed, almost balloon-like structure, is in a very literal sense the skull of a cooking animal. It is shaped by the absence of the jaw it no longer needed. Consider what this means. Every feature we associate with being human, the high forehead, the small face, the crowded teeth, the rounded cranium, the enormous brain, is downstream of fire. Of a behavioral choice made by creatures who were not yet us, sitting around heat sources they had learned to maintain, holding food over flame and changing the chemistry of what they ate. They did not know what they were doing. They did not know they were redesigning their species. They were hungry. They found that cooked food tasted better, filled them faster, took less effort to chew. They kept doing it, and it kept reshaping them. There is a fascinating detail that lives inside this story. Human teeth. Compared to every other great ape, human teeth are tiny. Our molars are small. Our canines are almost vestigial. We have the dentition of an animal that does not need to mechanically destroy its food before swallowing, because its food arrives already softened, already partially broken down, already transformed by heat before it ever reaches the mouth. Our teeth are the teeth of a cooking species. They were not always this small. They shrank. Over hundreds of thousands of years of cooked diets, selection pressure on large teeth dissolved. Small teeth were fine. Small teeth were enough. And small teeth, like the small jaw, freed the face to flatten, the skull to round, the brain to expand. Everything fits. Every piece of the anatomy points back to the same source. The short gut, the small jaw, the tiny teeth, the flat face, the high dome, the vast brain. They are not separate adaptations. They are one adaptation. They are the body reorganizing itself around a new energy source, around fire, around the act of cooking. This is what makes that moment in Wonderwerk Cave. 1,000,000 years ago, ash on the floor, burned bone in the sediment, early humans crouched around warmth they had made themselves, so staggering to sit with. They were not just cooking dinner. They were cooking the future. They were, without intention, without understanding, running the experiment that would produce every human who ever lived, every thought ever thought, every word ever spoken, every question ever asked, all of it downstream of that fire, all of it downstream of that first cooked meal. The human brain did not evolve and then discover cooking. Cooking is why the human brain exists at all. The weird title was never weird. It was anatomy. It was history. It was exactly, precisely, literally true.